Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for being here today. And for those of you who are listening online, I want to start with some updates. As you know, Aaron Gunchus was executed on March the 19th. I was present along with the Attorney General. The victim's family, as you know, had been waiting for justice for decades for their brother and son and family member. I remain committed to doing what's necessary to make sure that victims' families get the closure that they deserve. But I'm getting a lot of questions from the media on who is next, and we believe that one of the possible individuals, I don't have the list, that would be up to the Attorney General at this time. We believe that one of the likely people to be next is Richard Jerf. Now, if you've been in Arizona a long time, you might remember this case. If not, he's one of 22 inmates currently on death row who has exhausted all of his federal and state appeals. But there's a lot more about that individual that I want you to understand. In 1993, Richard Jerf went to the home of the Lunas and he forced his way in at gunpoint. He zip-tied and gagged the mother and her 5-year-old son. Several hours later, he subdued the 18-year-old daughter. He gagged her, he raped her, he stabbed her, and he slit her throat, killing her. An hour later, when the father, Albert Luna Sr., got home, he handcuffed the father to a bed and hit him repeatedly with an aluminum bat. When Jerf realized that Mr. Luna was not dead, he stabbed him and ultimately shot him 6 times. At different times through this ordeal, he said to the mother, "Do you want to watch your son die, or do you want him to watch you die?" He then shot and killed the mother and the 5-year-old. But before doing so, he made sure that she knew that her daughter and her husband were also dead. His actions on that day were pure evil. In 1996, Mr. Jerf was sentenced to death for the murders of those 4 members of the Luna family. He tried to avoid the death penalty by pleading guilty, but it did not work. A judge imposed the death penalty. It has now been 29 years since that death sentence was handed down, and the Luna family deserves justice. I am confident that the Attorney General will continue to seek death warrants on inmates who have exhausted their appeals, and I will continue to monitor this situation. Now, shifting to one of the legislative issues we've been closely monitoring, which is the mandatory reporting of child physical abuse, sexual abuse, and neglect. On April the 7th, Senate Bill 1437, which we worked on with the legislature, was signed into law. And I'd like to thank Senator Karen Warner for her efforts on this. It expands and clarifies who is legally required to report suspected abuse, neglect, or physical harm to children. To be clear, if you are a mandatory reporter, and that includes all school personnel, including now under this law, it will include school board members, you must make a report to law enforcement or Arizona Department of Child Safety. The report cannot merely be made to a school resource officer or a school safety officer. The report must get to the law enforcement agency that has jurisdiction over the crimes and to the investigative unit within that law enforcement agency. Also, to be clear, a school principal can't just take care of it by referring it to the SRO or SSO. They can't consult the parents to see if the parents want the police called. The parents are mandatory reporters too. School personnel must immediately make the direct report to police or DCS or both. Recently, my office has received far too many reports where what has happened is a school administrator has referred it to a school resource officer or a school safety officer. And let me be very clear, those people have very hard jobs and I respect the jobs that they do, but it is outside their lane to investigate allegations of child sexual and physical abuse and neglect. That needs to be done by trained detectives. There were cases that we could not pursue because of the way the investigation was conducted, or worse, not conducted. Now we have a law that clarifies the exact procedure that has to be followed so that we can advocate for and protect these kids. Another priority for us is Preston's Law, and that's named after Preston Lord. It's also known as House Bill 2611. When the first cases of teen violence came to our office in late 2023, it was quickly clear to me that the law was not where it needed to be in terms of what was being done by these groups of kids. The law as it currently stands says this: unless there is serious physical injury or a weapon or a broken bone, these assaults are Class 1 misdemeanors. My office was able to charge it up to a Class 6 felony, which is still the lowest level of felony, by making the argument that the victim's ability to resist was impaired because he or she were so surrounded by others that they could not resist or escape. But even a Class 6 felony after trial can be redesignated down to a misdemeanor. So Preston's Law changes that. It targets the swarming behavior that we are seeing, multiple individuals ganging up to attack one person. Once Preston's Law passes, if 3 or more people commit an assault on another person, and that can be kids, it can be adults, it will be a Class 4 felony, which is a permanent felony, rather than a charge that can be downgraded to a misdemeanor. And I want to thank Representatives Gress, Way, Willoughby, and others who sponsored and supported that bill. And now we need to get it to the final passage and on to the governor for her signature. One more bill that I would like to highlight is Senate Bill 1658. This would strengthen Arizona's animal cruelty statutes by providing clear and enforceable standards. Right now, the law has some vague terms. Believe it or not, even a muddy puddle could be argued to be adequate drinking water, the way the current law is worded. This bill ensures that pets receive needed medical care, species-appropriate food, and clean water. It also sets shelter requirements that protect dogs from the elements and allows them to move freely. To be clear, this law only applies to companion pets. It does not apply to livestock or farm animals. It does not criminalize being unhoused or allow pets to be taken away from people who are experiencing homelessness. It is a common sense step to prevent further suffering and hold bad actors accountable, and I fully support this legislation. Finally, I've also given my support to Senate Bill 1144. That is the jail facilities excise tax extension, which passed unanimously out of committee. Maricopa County pays for its jails by collecting a tax that is equal to 1/5 of 1 cent. But that tax is set to expire in 2027 if it is not renewed by the voters. That's why 1144 is a top priority for me. The alternative is not good. If we ran out of space in the jail, that means we would be compelled to let people out onto the streets who should not be there. Senate Bill 1144 would give the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors the ability to place this measure on the ballot, and that way you, the voters, get to decide whether to continue the tax. And with that, I'm happy to take your questions.
Could I ask about the situation with the dog beating in Peoria? What can you tell us about that?
Yes, we have received the submittal for that, and you're referring to the Chihuahua, and it is under review right now.
My understanding is that the recommendation from the police department was felony animal cruelty.
Mhm.
At that point, do you decide if he's arrested or turns himself in, or what, how it moves forward?
Let me describe the process generically. So when that kind of case comes in, we review it for the charges that are recommended by law enforcement. We can go with those charges. We can add to or change them, and then it is up to this office whether we issue a summons for them to turn themselves in, or whether we issue a warrant for that person's arrest. And so that's all part of the review process.
Can I ask the last question? Have you seen the video yourself?
I have not, but it has been described to me in detail. Yes.
I have a couple of questions from my colleague regarding the Vallow guilty verdict that came down. What does it mean for your office to get that guilty verdict?
Well, two things I would point out. One is, as you know, sentencing is not completed in that case, number one. Number two, there is another trial that will follow behind in a couple of months. So I don't want to talk too much about it. But what I would say is this: having watched portions of the trial and been briefed on it daily, I am extremely proud of the way that the prosecutor, Trina Kay, conducted herself and the efforts of the team that she led to get the conviction and get justice for the family.
And then a couple of follow-up questions for you on that. Will the approach taken in this case change the approach at all for the next murder conspiracy trial that is coming up?
I mean, each case is its own individual case, so I mean, I guess we'll adapt to that as the charges are and the evidence is.
I guess after seeing how her approach to her own defense.
Yeah, I mean, Trina Kay is an extremely experienced prosecutor, and I'm sure she'll make the right call on that.
And then last question, I know there have been a lot of people that have wondered why all of this is necessary in light of her convictions, her previous convictions in Idaho. Many have asked how much money the prosecution of Lori Valladable has cost here in Arizona. I don't know if you have an answer to that, and if so, if you can also expand upon why it is necessary to continue down this path.
Well, we don't keep billable hours like a law firm does. We're, salaried employees. And so, cost is not something that I can just give you a number to a case. But what I would say is this. If it was your loved one who was killed, would you be okay with Rachel Mitchell saying, somebody else got her for something else, so we're just going to ignore that?
I have a couple of questions about child sex crimes.
Mhm.
I know that there was a former football coach in Mesa who was accused of felony child sex crimes.
Mhm.
Your office ultimately decided not to prosecute that case. Can you explain why?
Sure, you're talking about the Godsill case? Yeah. In order to prove that type of offense that was submitted, you have to show that there was an agreement to have sex. That actually did not happen in this particular case. There was no actual agreement or exchange agreed upon.
We hear about these kind of cases frequently, unfortunately,
Yeah.
where a teacher, a coach, a professor. There was a case actually we just learned about today involving an ASU professor accused of something similar involving a 15-year-old boy. But in these cases, a lot of times it's an undercover sting operation that leads to these arrests. Can you talk about how challenging it is to prosecute arrests that come out of these undercover sting operations?
Yeah, I mean, some of the case, it depends on the facts of the case, and those aren't always under the control of law enforcement. They can conduct a very appropriate, effective sting, but it still is dependent on what the individual does, and so under some circumstances it's very easy. Under other circumstances, it cannot be done. And that was one of the examples, is the Godsill case.
Do you have any data that you can share on just how frequently an arrest like this turns into a conviction? It seems anecdotally that it doesn't happen super often. We hear about the arrest, but a lot of the times your office finds there is no likelihood of conviction, therefore there's no formal charge. But of course, an accusation like this, they lose their job, it's a big deal.
Yeah, and yes, exactly, and then that's where it draws the attention. What I would say is we could get those numbers to you in terms of how many cases are submitted to us and what the charging outcome is. We could do that. Hi.
Hey, I want to turn to Alex Bengash, accused serial rapist, went from no bond to cash bond, and was able to cut off his ankle monitor. Is there any concern from you about, a bond reduction like that, and then with the ankle monitors themselves, is that something you see more frequently than we realize?
Obviously, I am concerned about somebody who is in custody and I'm speaking generically, for multiple offenses that are violent. And, I do need to say that, people are innocent until proven guilty. Um, but I think there's a general misconception about ankle monitoring. And in fact, I commented recently that monitoring's kind of a misnomer because I think people envision that there's somebody monitoring, a red dot on a screen following where these individuals are. And there is no live monitoring. So to me, it's a false security to have ankle monitoring. It's not nothing, but it's certainly not what everybody thinks it is. And I don't think it's a replacement for jail when people are accused of violent offenses.
I want to turn to Dan Cotton, Buckeye City manager who resigned over a criminal investigation. Has that made its way to your office?
No, we don't have a submittal yet on that.
Can I ask your takeaway on Lori Vallow representing herself?
I'm gonna hold off on commenting on that till both cases are over. Thank you. Yeah.
I have a couple of questions on various cases. Daniel Langs,
Uh-huh.
wondering, with that case where he ripped a victim's eye right out of its socket, there's some concern, should he have ever been out on the streets?
Well, in what sense? I mean, in terms of like a mental health commitment or something like that. Is that?
Yeah, or
Yeah.
should something have been done, sooner?
Yeah, it's horrendous what happened, and what we can do is we can move forward with the charge that we have now and make sure that he is, in custody. But I share your horror about what happened.
Sorry, I just have a couple of random questions. Can you share any reaction to April Sponsel's ruling from the state Supreme Court?
April Sponsel, I think the Supreme Court upheld her 2-year suspension a few months ago with an opinion to follow, and that opinion just came down, I think, a couple of weeks ago. Um, just to remind you, I'm the one that fired her from this office for the behavior that is noted in that opinion, and I stand by that, and I think suspension was appropriate.
And my last question, can you give any thoughts on the plea for John Bird or anything that you can say in general about how Pinal County handled that case?
Well, obviously, John Bird is, a tragic situation for his family. For those people who knew him as well, it's shocking. All I would say is I really appreciate the Pinal County Attorney's Office stepping up and handling the case because obviously there was a conflict of interest, and so we're very appreciative of that.
Bianca, could you get up to the microphone so that people who are watching on Facebook can listen? Please, thank you.
I have just a couple of questions about additional cases now as well. I want to ask you about the Cujo Young case. That's the gentleman accused of robbing Mercedes Vega at gunpoint a couple of years before she was murdered. At this point, there have been 16 delays or continuances or changes of attorneys and counsel. The defense filed another motion recently in an effort to delay the case once again. The family called me last week on the anniversary of their daughter's death saying they feel helpless at this point, that they feel like this defendant is just taking advantage of the system. How can you respond to a family in that position?
I can't even imagine what they're going through. I mean, first of all, to lose their daughter, and then to feel like the system is not working for them. Delays are frustrating for us as well. What I would say is we are, committed to hang in there to make sure that justice is served in this case, and we're working with them, and we'll continue to work with them to make sure that that does happen in their daughter's case.
A different case, one that I get messages about every week, I'm sure you do as well. The Laura Owens.
How did I know it was going to be that case? No, I get them every day.
I know. I see the receipts.
Yeah.
Is there any update that you can provide on your investigation in light of the Court of Appeals affirming the original judgment?
Yeah. I'm at the point, we are still actively investigating it. What I will simply say is stay tuned.
And then last question, we did notice that 2 additional defendants in the Preston Lord case now have settlement conferences scheduled for the end of May. Are you able to provide any information about what led to the scheduling of those settlement conferences? In reading the complex case management reports, it looked like your office had not been extending plea agreements, but they may have been requested from the defense. Anything that you can share on that process?
Yeah, I don't want to comment directly on any sort of plea negotiations. What I would say is that settlement conferences are very common in cases, whether or not there's an intent to plead or not. And the reason for that is simple. You want to, as a prosecutor, put on the record, clear indication that the defendant knows what he or she is facing in terms of if you go to trial. And so that's an important aspect of settlement conferences that may or may not result in a plea. So it's just not uncommon to do that.
I guess I should ask, has a plea deal been extended to Lori Valadero ahead of her second trial?
I'm not going to comment on that.
Could I ask a couple of questions on immigration? Like we had the situation, sounds like in Tucson, where the man was detained incorrectly, and then of course Garcia in El Salvador. Can we just get your reaction as a prosecutor with what's going on?
Obviously, this office provides ample opportunity for me to work on a lot of issues. I have been, and I've said this, concerned about the immigration situation and having violent individuals come across the border. As to these 2 specific situations, I know that they're going to be worked out in the courts, and obviously we'll respect what the courts decide in this. But at this point, I don't have enough that I'm going to specifically comment on, how what the outcome of that should be.
Just a couple different cases as well to ask about. Joseph Zavala, student prosecutor, there's a video that we've seen now where it looks like he's been hit in the head over and over again by officers. We've had folks reach out wondering if officers could face any charges or investigation in that case. And I guess when you see a video like that, how do you continue a prosecution against someone who may have been the victim of what looks like an attack just from the video that we've seen?
Well, I've watched the whole video, so and I am aware of the entire context of that encounter. I know that there is an investigation being conducted in terms of the police officer's actions on that, and if we get a submittal on that, we will review that as well. That's how I would respond to that.
And then Jacob Moore, sentenced last week after hitting joggers in Acuso last year. Some look at that 4-year sentence after hitting and killing someone and leaving the scene. They view it as light. Obviously, his relationship with someone in the police department. How do you ensure ensure folks that there isn't any sort of preferential treatment here for a person like that?
Well, what I would do is remind people of the facts of that case. First of all, you had a situation where there were respected experts who put the blood alcohol content below the legal limit of 0.08. You don't have an actual blood drawing at the time that showed the blood alcohol content. You have other experts who are saying that there was an obstruction of the person's view by a slower moving vehicle up front. You also have the fact that the medical examiner did not rule this a homicide, but ruled it an accident. And so all of those factors have to play a role in what type of offer that we make in this case. And in terms of preferential treatment, I would remind everybody that it was the father, a police officer, who helped turn his son in. And so, it's a tragic situation no matter whose son it is, but we're not going to pay attention to the father's role or father's work. We're going to do the right thing, but we have to base it on the facts that we have.
And just to follow up on that, because we understand that the father may have worked in the vehicular crimes unit, is there anything that has to be done to limit any relationships you may have with folks in your office?
If there are any situations where an attorney feels like he or she cannot work the case because of that relationship, keep in mind, as somebody who worked in sex crimes for years, I didn't know every single detective who worked in sex crimes, then we will take those actions to wall that person off.
And last one for me, I understand there's the Senate bill moving forward, the victims of certain crimes can now get free police reports and video through your office. I guess just an explanation on how that works and how important that is for you to provide that to the victims and their families.
Well, actually, it's interesting because that's really a duplication of what they already had, which was the ability to go to police agencies to get that. So we were concerned that it would cause additional effort that was duplicated. However, the legislature passed it, the governor signed it, and we're going to abide by it.
Anything else?
Okay. Have a good day, everybody.